Today, I'm going to talk about 6 responsibilities that you cannot delegate. It's what you can't delegate and why you can't. The Authentic Leader Show is the podcast for technology and other industry leaders who are delegation masters and lead high-performing technology teams. Leaders who attend my Delegation Master workshops learn about delegating as much as they can do so that they can make room for higher level thinking. That probably makes sense to a lot of people. But sometimes these same leaders have gotten overeager and go beyond what they are actually able to delegate. Now, don't worry. I've improved my workshop to emphasize what you can and can't delegate so that leaders are perfectly clear about what not only you can't delegate, but also why you can't delegate some of those key responsibilities. When over delegating key responsibilities that the leader can't delegate, it creates a real problem for the leader that can be hard to recover from. Because when a leader crosses that line, the leader's earned credibility and influence, it erodes. It's kind of like when you brush your teeth too hard and your gums begin to recede. Your gums don't naturally recover. The only way to recover that damage is through surgery. Now, that may be a gruesome example, but recovering from eroded leadership is just about as hard, and it may even be harder in some ways. I want to keep you from delegating more than you're able and ruining your earned influence as a leader. What's the saying? Prevention is easier than the cure, right? Preventing an erosion of your leadership from misguided delegation can be shown through examples. Examples that I'm going to share here today, they're not comprehensive. In other words, I'm not saying if you don't delegate these 6 things, you don't have anything to worry about. Rather, these examples are to get you thinking about other similar things that you can't delegate. Well, let's start off with these examples. Number 1, you probably won't be surprised to learn that you can't delegate hiring, but I've seen leaders try to do this. There is a lot to be said for the principle of hire slow and fire fast, and that's the temptation for some leaders to want to delegate hiring. As the leader of the team, you may delegate some components of hiring that you can't and maybe shouldn't do. Examples that you might delegate are the HR functions of receiving resumes or applications for a job that you have just posted, or doing background checks and validating work history, having key team members of your team involved in the interview process, and other functions of the hiring process that don't require your direct involvement and actually are a part of strategic delegation. But when it comes to making the decision to hire someone to join your team that you lead, you cannot delegate that. Not only can't you delegate the hiring decision, I've seen plenty of leaders regret delegating the hiring decision. Key among many of the things that you will live with is the decision that you have someone to join your team. Also, because you're responsible for this decision, you're also responsible if it ends up being a bad decision and everything that goes with dealing with a bad hire. Leading on a positive note before we go to the next example is that you get to enjoy the productivity and the positive addition to your team's culture when you have made a good hiring decision. Number 2, speaking of culture, leaders need to accept that they are fully responsible for the team's culture. As I was speaking with a CEO a few years ago, as he proudly shared how serious that he was about being intentional with the organization's culture, I was pleased to hear that because I strongly believe that the organization's culture, it starts at the top, and being intentional about setting the organization's culture from the top is key. When this happens, the other leaders in the organization create a complementary culture for their teams. But then I was disappointed for the CEO. The CEO went on to explain that they were so committed to being intentional about the organization's culture that he created and filled a position as a chief culture officer. Now, to be fair, I can see a role like this as someone who executes the intended culture set by the CEO. But the message can be dangerous. Having a dedicated and stated role looks a lot like the culture has been delegated to someone other than the top leader. Even if you aren't the top leader of the organization, if you are leading a team, you are fully responsible for the culture of your team, and it can't be delegated. Number three is the vision of where your organization or your team is going also cannot be delegated. Now, just to be clear, I'm not saying that the team shouldn't be actively engaged in creating a vision statement. It's imperative that your team works together as a team, which looks a lot like leading and facilitating discussion when creating that vision statement. When the team is involved, the vision becomes part of who they are, and the team operates through that vision. A strong and compelling vision is a tool for confident decision making down the road when making decisions amongst the team. In my workshops, I share a story about when I met and had an opportunity to ask the late, great Stephen Covey about handling team and organizational vision when the team members over time leave and new team members join. Now, we don't have time for me to share this entire story here, but I promise you it was a classic Stephen Covey answer that I will never forget. The bottom line here is that the leader owns and cannot delegate the organization or team vision by engaging the team and then establishing that vision. Number four, this one it's a super easy responsibility to wrongly delegate. It's when the leader delegates too much too soon. I touch on this actually in quite a bit more detail in my podcast episode 105. This is a little tricky for me to say that this is something that you can't delegate. What I'm saying here is you can delegate too much. Even if the work you are delegating is appropriate to delegate, leaders will wrongly delegate more than they should. For example, if you need to delegate to someone on your team to collect data and generate a report that the person you choose to delegate to, if they are a new member of your team, you can't delegate the collection of data, generating a report, as you would delegate that same work to a seasoned, experienced, and skilled member of your team who does this kind of work all the time. This is another topic that we don't have time to address completely here, but there are what I call phases of delegation that I teach to help leaders to determine the appropriate phase of delegation so that the new team member is set up for success, and over time, the leader will be able to more fully delegate that same work to that team member. Number five is that you cannot delegate holding team members accountable for their work. This goes for the work that they already is a bona fide function of their role or any new delegated work. As the leader of the team, you can't delegate holding your team members accountable for the work that they do. You can't have someone else approach a team member and ask for an update or hold them accountable to a deadline or give them feedback on their work result. You must do that. It's a bona fide part of your job as the leader of your team. I've seen leaders ask me this question before. Well, Chris, what about when you lead a team of supervisors, team leaders, or managers? Aren't they responsible for holding their team members accountable since they are responsible as the supervisor, team leader, or manager? Well, what do you think that I'll say to that? Well, yes, you are leading a team of supervisors, team leaders, and managers. Then, yes, they are responsible for holding their team members accountable. It would be inappropriate for you to hold their team members accountable because you would negate their leadership by skipping over them. You can't delegate holding others accountable when you are directly responsible for their work results. Lastly is number six that I'll share here, and it's a critical responsibility for anyone leading teams is to give feedback often. This is a daily part of your leadership role. You can't delegate that to anyone else. I know a lot of leaders who are uncomfortable with giving feedback. So that is why many leaders may think that they can delegate feedback. Yes, I get it. Giving feedback can be awkward, but it doesn't have to be. To make giving feedback to your team easier, a leader creates a culture of not only giving feedback, but also receiving feedback themselves. Creating a culture has many simple components that to make it safe for the leader to give feedback. Leaders who seek feedback from their team, their peers, and of course their boss are leaders who genuinely want to be better. That's also part of creating a culture of feedback. All of this to say that the leader can't delegate any kind of feedback, even when giving positive feedback. Imagine that anyway. I mean, how would it be to receive feedback from anyone other than the person who has the feedback to give? Imagine this. Hey, Fred, tell Edward that I think he should have done a better job with the work that I delegated to him. It doesn't make sense to you and me, but believe me, I've seen this happen in real life. There you go. These are the 6 responsibilities that I shared here today. And of course, there are more than just these 6. But the 6 I shared here today is number 1, hiring. You can't delegate hiring, right? You are the person making the decision to hire someone to join your team. Culture. You can't delegate culture. It comes from the top. Number 3 is your organizational or your team vision. You have to drive and facilitate that. Number 4 is, of course, delegating too much. Make sure you're delegating at the appropriate phase of delegation. Number 5 is holding people accountable for delegated work. You can't delegate that to someone else. And then number 6 is giving feedback. It's a regular part of your daily actions as a leader of your team. It's up to you to give that feedback. So my question for you is, which of these responsibilities are you really good at with your team? I'd love to talk with you about any of these examples or others that maybe you're unsure about. You can schedule your free strategy call at ChristopherRJones.com. If you can relate to anything that I shared today, or if you have any questions, put them in the comments here and I'll respond. You can also DM me and reach out to me through my LinkedIn profile. Next month, I'll be hosting a delegation workshop. I'll be giving away all that you need to know to become a delegation master. If you'd like to learn more about this workshop, send me an email, private message me, or leave a comment below and I'll get you all of the details. Connect with me on LinkedIn. You can find me at I am Christopher Jones. You can find more information and other free resources when you go to ChristopherRJones.com. Hey, thank you for joining us today. Please come back next week for another podcast episode.